today we are going to focus on creating effective narratives in your cover letters. Cover letters are a particularly difficult genre, I think, because they're a much less structured set of materials. So let's do some introductions first. I'm Dr. Joseph Barber. I am the Director of Graduate Career Initiatives here at Penn's Career Services. In order to figure out with what a cover letter is, we sort of have to know where it fits into the genre of other materials that you're sending. So the cover letter sits nicely with materials that you're sending. People often ask for a resume and a cover letter, a CV and a cover letter, right? So it's meant to do something different. So we have to figure out how these documents work together in order to figure out how best to use the cover letter as part of your application. So a resume really is a breakdown of your relevant skills for the job that you're applying to. We always talk about resumes being highly customizable tools where the skills that you're highlighting in the resume really need to connect with the job and the resources that you are applying to. The role that you're applying to. So you're pulling those keywords from the job description and you're using those to describe your experiences. As such, it's a very sort of dry document, right? It's very punchy. I use this skill to do this thing that led to this outcome. I led, I delivered, I analyzed. And so it doesn't really talk a lot like, it doesn't sound like a lot like you in terms of the way that you are describing yourself, or that you would describe yourself if you were in conversation. But it makes it very easy for the employer to say, do you have the things that we need you to have in order for you to be successful in this role? So it's an easy document to scan, easy document to get through, but it doesn't really sound particularly human in the way that it comes across. Some of the challenges in this document is that you do have to use different language to describe what you're doing, right? You do have to highlight the skills that the job needs and make sure that that language is at the forefront of your resume, even though that may not be language that you use in the resume. When I talk about the resume being a sort of a fairly dry document, one of the reasons that is because there's no sort of energizing language that you really use in a resume. You don't really say as a bullet point, excitedly collaborated with a group of students or satisfyingly completed this analysis, right? So there's no sort of emotional elements to it that sort of make it resonate with the reader. You're just getting across the facts that are out there. So then the cover letters are different from that, because obviously, if you just say the same things that you say in the resume, it's just two documents with the same information in slightly different formats, and that's not very helpful. It doesn't offer anything in particular. So the cover letter, rather than saying, here's what skills I have, says, here's how my skills are relevant. Here's why my skills can be useful to you. Here's why I want the job. And here's me showing you how I approach the work that you need me to do using these skills. And so very much it's putting into context how all of these great skills that you're having in your resume make sense to the employer, right? So it allows them to sort of better visualize the way that you use your skills to do the things that they need you to do, or to overcome some of the challenges that you're likely to overcome as part of this new role. Every role has challenges. How well are you prepared to overcome those challenges using your skills and based on your experiences? Because the cover letter is, paragraphs of text rather than bullet points, it does offer a more narrative style when you're writing it, right? So sometimes I see suggestions for cover letters where there's a block of text and there's a series of bullet points in the cover letter. And that's perfectly good. I mean, what you'll find with cover letter advice is it spans the whole spectrum. People will have different perspectives on that. And I'm not saying any perspective is right or wrong, because it ultimately only depends on the hiring manager and what they care about. But my take on the sort of bullet points within the cover letter is that they really sound very much like the resume, and the resume already covers a lot of those bullet points. So rather than just sort of having more bullet points, which is overwhelming, use the cover letter to tell the story. Use the paragraph format to string together a few sentences that feel more like a story as people are reading it, right? And so what you do in a cover letter in the general terms is you expand on a few things from the resume and tell us sort of a story about that. And that doesn't mean a story about a whole experience, right? So if you're here for a 3-year master's program, you're not trying to tell a story about a 3-year experience. What you're trying to tell a story about is a small slice of that experience that is most relevant to the role that you're applying to. So you don't have to describe everything. You're just trying to illustrate with small examples the thing that will make sense. And we'll go through and we'll talk about how this will look and how this feels as we're doing that. So I just want to jump back to some of the comments that people posted, and thank you for doing that. So I struggle with not sounding too generic in cover letters, right? And so this is, I think, part of this process of being more human as you're talking about your experiences. Because if you let people into your head, into the way that you think and the way that you approach the work that you've done and the way that you have overcome, unique challenges as part of that, then the stories that you're telling in the cover letter are unique to you, right? It's the same skills that everyone else says that they have and want to bring, but how you put those into context is unique to you. And that makes it interesting for the reader because they don't know you yet. They're trying to get to know you. So those unique stories are interesting. Next challenge, deciding whether to address one skill in depth or cover many at a higher level. So again, the resume always will do a better job of covering the broadest range of skills. Your job as part of the cover letter is to decide which of those skills makes the best story that illustrates not just one skill, but it's sort of a cluster of skills together. And that's based on what you know about the job, based on what you know about the organization. So to a certain extent, a couple of stories that highlight main skills is probably a good approach for that one. And then how to present personal information professionally. So it kind of depends on what you mean by personal in this context, but personal is, in my perspective in the cover letter, the way that you think about things, right? So when a job description says we need someone who's passionate, it's hard just to say, oh yes, well, I'm very passionate, right? Passion is not, just by using the word doesn't illustrate passion, doesn't bring energy. Again, not something in a resume. Passionately collaborated is not the right word at all for that type of experience. So you sort of have to explain why you're passionate, what brings the energy to you as you're thinking about this topic or doing this role, right? So that inner workings of your brain, that's the personal side of it. Now, there are other personal aspects about, why you might want a job because your partner is in the local area or you have family in the area. That's more nuanced perspective, but that's a one sentence part of the cover letter if you want to include something like that. And not every time do you need to do that. So thank you for sharing those. I appreciate that. So imagine then a cover letter as your introduction. You walk into a room and there's an employer that's like, hey, great to see you here. You said you're interested. Tell me about yourself, right? And so the cover letter really is that tell me about yourself interview answer, but in written form. So it doesn't have to be overly formal. It doesn't have to sound too sort of business-like, as it were. It can be it can be relevant, sort of connected to the way that you see the world. It shouldn't be informal or casual, but I think you want it to sound like you, as if you're talking to someone. And sometimes when I ask someone to sort of spell out what they were trying to get across in the cover letter, and they verbally describe what it was that they're trying to communicate, what they say verbally makes a better aspect of the cover letter than what they've written down, right? Our sort of the way that we think verbally and the way that we write are very distinct in the way that our language comes across. So sometimes just saying things out loud and then trying to capture that and sort of integrate some of those into the cover letter, I think is going to be a more effective approach. Again, just as a repeat, not everything, well, everything in the cover letter that you mentioned in the cover letter should be echoed by something in the resume. Not everything in the resume needs to be covered by something in the cover letter. You really want to draw to the forefront the most engaging stories that are most relevant to your audience. And it's true that neither of these documents, the resume or the cover letter by itself, will necessarily get you the interview, right? Because they won't get you the job, they get you the interview. But a lot of people look at these cover letters and get a better understanding of why someone actually wants to work there, or why they want this job, or why they think their value adds something to it. And that can be a differentiator, especially if you have a background that is somewhat different from the role that you're applying to. You're making a slight transition from your academic background to a new role. You may have to do a little bit more explaining about why that different experience really makes you make sense, because the resume can't really do that itself. It's very chronologically based. I did this, I did this, I did this. In a cover letter, you can bring those things together and say, look, across all of these experiences that I've had, there's a common theme, and that is X, innovating. And I want to bring that innovation skill to this new role where you said you're looking for someone to do that. So thinking about how to connect themes together in a cover letter is also a great thing to do, because you're not bound by a chronological order in a cover letter. You can make connections between very different themes and different experiences to show how they make sense to the role that's out there. It does take a long time to write a good cover letter to a certain extent, right? And you really shouldn't just have a cover letter that you change the name of the employer at the top and the name of the employer at the bottom or something like that, because that's really not doing you a lot of, giving you a lot of benefit in terms of illustrating the value that your particular skill sets brings to this role. So it is worthwhile, and sometimes people will say cover letter is optional in the job description. If you have the bandwidth and you have the time and you're really excited by the job, I think the optional, is something that you should take advantage of and say, yes, let me tell you a little bit more about my story and what that looks like and how I can bring value to this role. So again, this is sort of the breakdown then of the different roles that these materials play. So the resume, very much skills focused, illustrating things in action is where all your technical skills are listed, right? So if you have quantitative skills and programming skills, you're going to list all of those, or scientific skills, you're going to list all of those. You don't really want to list those types of things in a cover letter because no one likes to read a paragraph made up of 17 different things that you have. That's not a way to get something stuck in someone's head, because it's not a story. It's sort of easy to skip through then, and then you begin to miss things. A story is gripping, it holds people's attention. Cover letter, examples that take a small slice from something that is mentioned in the resume and makes it make more sense in terms of the context of the job that you're applying to. And making sure that the employers can see and understand the relevance of your background, even if it doesn't at first glance from the resume look like that's the case. Obviously, you want both of these documents to demonstrate that you have relevant skills. Sometimes, depending on your field, there may be another document, right? A portfolio. So if you're in an architecture field, you may have a portfolio of your design work. Or you might have coding that you want to demonstrate. You might have your GitHub account on your resume. People can go look at those types of things as well. Each of these plays a different type of role in the process. But if we think about how sort of hiring managers process this information, the sense that I get, and obviously I can't know because the process is hidden, the sense that I get is people always look at a resume first. It's what the applicant tracking software that companies use to sort of process materials, that's what they look at. They look at the software, looks at the resume, not the other materials. But it's easier to compare potential candidates in a resume because it's a structured document, education to education, experience, skills to skills, right? So you can sort of match between those. In a field like design, portfolio is probably going to be next. They want to see the work, right? What does the work look like? That's what's meaningful in that field. And then the cover letter comes last, because I don't think people want to invest too much in a cover letter up front, because a page of text where people are telling their sort of more unique stories is hard to process without first being confident that the person has something valuable to bring. So this is how I, based on my understanding and chatting with people, this is how I think it sort of works out. So the cover letter isn't necessarily the first thing that people read, but it can be. But just because it's number 3 in the list doesn't mean that it's any less important, right? Each of these things is adding a different dynamic to the application that you are making. This is something I saw on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and this was just a post that someone made about cover letters, right? So this is one person's perspective, but it's an interesting one, and I'll give you a second just to read through this. So the main feedback here from this person is that people are just using stock language because it sounds good, but it doesn't say anything. After reviewing your job description, it's clear that you're looking for a candidate that's familiar with the responsibilities and can perform them. Given this, I am certain I have the skills necessary to do that, right? So if I don't know anything about you and I read that, I have no imagery in my mind that allows me to picture you doing any of these things. They're just words, right? It's like me saying, I'm a great leader. I'm fantastic at doing amazing things. It doesn't mean anything because there's no context to put that into to make it make sense from the employer's perspective. So it is important to understand that the more specific it is to your experience, the more interesting it is, because it's allowing the person who potentially might be your future boss or supervisor to sort of get a sense of who you are and how you approach the work and how potentially they may want to work with you, right? Obviously, the interview comes next to figure that out. The resume then paints a very clear black and white picture of the skills that you have and the experiences that you have. But it's, it's a 2-dimensional document. It's very flat. It's very, unalive in terms of the way it sort of presents. With the cover letter, you become a much richer entity in someone's mind. You're able to then add all these elements on, and you become more colorful and more meaningful and more relevant, right? And really, that's the sort of the goal of what I want to get across today, is that these are all things that the cover letter can do. And this is why it's so important to make it make sense. Okay, so let's think about how to approach it then. Some of the challenges that might come across with cover letters in general term are that if it is a generic document, it doesn't really say how your experiences match the role that you're applying to, right? If it's a document that does just repeat exactly what I've read in the resume, reading the same thing twice, exactly the same thing twice, can be really boring. And sometimes I really do see that when I'm doing cover letter reviews, I can see the text from the bullet point in the cover letter, right? And that's less appealing. Generic statements, we talked about that. And then, writing, obviously, that's just unclear and doesn't quite communicate what you're trying to get across. And so, those international students where English is your second language, it can be hard to create a nice flowing narrative document without some, time invested into that process. We do provide feedback, on cover letters at Career Services. There's also the Marks Family Writing Center on campus, and they might be able to help with the sort of the grammatical aspects of the letter as opposed to the content of the letter as well. From the employer's perspective, sometimes, when you're on receiving cover letters, you read one, you're like, do they actually want this job, or do they just want a job, right? And so if it's not clear that this letter is directed to a specific opportunity, that can be challenging too, because it just doesn't then engage with you as you're reading these things. If your statements are too generic, the reader just can't picture how you're doing these things, right? It's great that you did them, but you just saying that you did something doesn't really create imagery that allows the hiring manager to sort of superimpose your image on the position that they're trying to fill, right? So that's a challenge as it relates to imagining you in this role. If you are sort of making a career transition to a certain extent, or a subject transition, and your research is in one area, but you're applying for a role that does not utilize that research or does not engage in that research directly, and you spend all your time talking about what you are doing right now in the language that you use right now, then the reader just may not understand what it is that you're doing, may not understand the value of that, because it's not what they do day to day. So one of the challenges of a cover letter is to make sure that you are always describing your experiences in a language that is common to the employers that you're applying to. So understanding how they talk about their skills and experiences, and then describing your research from that perspective. Okay, so let's think about then providing you with this strong foundation for the cover letter. One of the ways that I like to think about cover letters is to try to find that intersection between the stories that you actually want to tell about your experiences and the stories that employers want to hear to make sure that you can do the job that you're applying to, right? So there are lots of things that you are excited about in terms of the research that you're doing or the work that you're doing at Penn, and you spend a lot of time doing that, and given the chance, you'd love to tell people about those. Obviously, if those things aren't relevant to your employer, then they're not necessarily the best stories. But there are still things within that sort of genre of things that you could talk about that you're most excited by. And I think if you can identify the things that you're most excited by and would like to talk about, then those are the things that will come with a natural energy as you're writing about them in the cover letter, right? You'll be energized as you're writing about them, because as you do that, you'll be like, yes, this was a great project. I enjoy doing that. I use this skill effectively. Then you have to understand what the employer cares about, right? What do they say in the job description? What floats to the top in terms of their priorities? If you've networked with people, what are you hearing from those people in terms of what are the types of challenges that people face in this role? And then how can you tell stories that are related to some of those challenges? You also want to think about the flavor of emotions that come across in the job description itself, right? So I'll show you a couple of examples in a second, but the idea is that you can be more emotionally resonant in the cover letter. You can talk about being excited and enjoying things and being satisfied, or even just being challenged by things. This was a real challenge, right? This is sort of emotionally charged yet professional language that adds energy to the letter. And I think that's one of the keys to a cover letter, is that it should feel energizing. One page of energizing stories is really easy to read. One page of long lists of skills that you've already talked about in the resume is harder to read and get excited by. So matching the energy from the way that you're writing your letter to what's in the job description is really important. So here's just a couple of positions that I pulled up. This is a program manager at Exposure Labs, doesn't really matter. We're seeking a candidate who is passionate about mentorship and cultivating diverse community of storytellers. Provided that there's a strong interest and a desire to learn, we're happy to have different experiences. We're looking for someone who's an activist and a change maker, can lead the work through an equity lens, has a great sense of humor. So that these are sort of the emotionally resonant sort of skills or experiences that they're looking for from that. And these are things that you can begin to say, well, how can I really demonstrate that, for example, change making is something that I want, or that I am passionate about mentorship? So, in the resume, you might say about mentorship, well, I mentored 3 graduate students, right? That's something that you may have done in your lab, for example. It's not very exciting the way that it's written, right? That's what you did. So it's accurately, to put in the resume that way, you have the mentoring skill. In a cover letter, you might talk about why you did that, right? So I sought out the opportunity to mentor students because I've always valued strong mentorship in my positions. For example, coming into this new role, 2 of my mentors were able to give me the skills necessary to do that, and I leveraged that, and I want to pass that on, right? So obviously, mentorship isn't the only sort of skill that they're looking for, but there could be a story that you could tell about why mentorship is important to you, as opposed to just saying, in my lab, I mentored 3 graduate students, right? Because there's no story there. There's no element of drama that's going to sort of hold the reader's attention. So in a resume, you may talk about gaining knowledge of first-gen students by holding 2 focus groups, right? So the needs of the communities who are most impacted by extractive tech. So you might sort of use that skill set to sort of demonstrate that you have an interest in different populations and their needs. But again, gain knowledge is not a sort of a dynamic skill per se, but when I was on the committee, I used the data to advocate for something, right? So not only is that learning, having a desire to learn about, but it's also being an activist and a change maker. I successfully advocated for something that had an impact, that had a long, had a significant impact to the population that I was interested in. So the cover letter sort of adds perspective to the skills that you are listing then in the resume. A learning program manager at Capital One. We are a passionate team that embraces bold ideas, fosters collaboration, challenges the status quo, and inspires personal growth. If you're excited about helping others, then this is a position for you. We want people who enjoy working autonomously in fast-paced environment, passionate about empowering associates with the skills. So enjoy, passionate, these are language, excited, these are words that are coming there that you can resonate. You can use that similar language in your cover letter as well. So in the resume, you might say, well, yes, I did collaborate with a team of 4 students to do a market analysis as part of a student consulting club, right? So again, collaborating with 4 students is a very sort of succinct way of getting across the fact that you have that skill and you can work across fields. As you think about the story in the cover letter, it might be broader than that. As a member of the student group, I quickly brought the team together for a skill sharing icebreaker. I wanted to make sure people were able to work together effectively, which helped us identify how we could bring our different skills to the project that we're working on. And then you could say, my idea to sort of to be bold and to come up with new ideas was really seen as a benefit by the CEO as part of this experience. And then at the end, you reflect on that. I really enjoyed that learning journey that we took as a team to get to this great outcome, right? That's your personal perspective, your thought on the matter. And what it does is it adds that element of energy to the way that you're describing it, right? You're taking a step back from saying, here's what I did, and saying, you know what? I really enjoyed that. And if that's something that they want you to do in this new role, enjoy doing that type of work, then that's meaningful to the reader because it gives them insight into your personal perspectives and the way that you approach the work. Let's think now about the sort of the structure of the cover letter. Resumes can be multiple pages, right? If you're applying for a research and development role in biotech or biopharma, you may have a 3-page resume. It's sort of a hybrid between a CV and a resume, but it's mostly a resume because it's skills focused. If you're applying for consulting, it might be 1 page. If there's communications, 1 page, so on. So there's differences between that. I would really stick to a 1-page cover letter in most cases because unless you're applying for a faculty role, in which case cover letters can sometimes be 2.5 pages, which is a lot, but there's sort of a reason behind that. But in most cases, most professional roles, 1 page is the goal that you are trying to get across in terms of your length. This is sort of what you're trying to cover then in that 1 page. First of all, what it is that you're applying to, you have to be very direct about that. Why you have relevant experiences that are going to be exciting to the reader, how you approach the work, what energizes you as you do the work, why you're interested in that particular organization and that particular role, how you might be connected to that organization, and you want to give the person who's reading this a sense that they want to find out more about these things, right? You obviously can't tell them everything about you, but you want to make them feel like there's more to get from you. There's other experiences that you could talk about that would be exciting. The recommendation then I have for breaking this down in terms of structuring the letter, again, there's no one way to do this. This is just my suggestions based on the experience that I have, is sort of these blocks of paragraphs, right? The first paragraph is really, I'm applying for this position, and here are the skills that I bring to bear for this role. And I'll give you an example of what that can look like. The middle paragraphs then are your here's what I can do, and here's an example of me doing it type paragraphs, right? So yes, you should tell stories, but you can frame those stories with some general information. As a graduate student at Penn, I have done X, Y, and Z, and I've been involved in all of these things. And together, this really demonstrates my interest in innovation. For example, and then you can tell a story that sort of supports that. So those are your middle paragraphs. 1 or 2 is probably going to be a good way of doing that. And then the question, the last paragraph is really why this job, why this organization, right? This is where you have to sort of authentically say, this is why I'm applying for this role. And yes, you sort of have to come up with a reason for every job that you're applying to. And it should be as authentic as possible. If you don't really have a reason, which in some case can happen, then probably saying less is better than trying to make up a reason why you really want to work there. But if you've chatted with people or you know about the organization, know about the projects, this is where you might talk about that. In terms then of what you're trying to cover in this letter, the first 2/3 or 3/4 are really prioritizing what you bring to the role. And then the last bit is what you gain from having this role, professionally, what you gain from having this role. Oftentimes people start with saying, I'm so excited by this role. It'd be great for me to get this role because then I could do these things, right? And that sort of positions it more for your benefit than from their benefit. But really from the hiring manager's perspective, their first goal is, can you do the job that you're applying to, right? They have to figure that out first before they can get excited about what you're excited by. But if they know that you can do the job because you really illustrate that, then when you say at the end, I'm really excited by this, and this is really a good fit for me, then they have more belief in that, but they have more certainty that not only can you offer something, but they can offer you something in return as well, in addition to paying you to do the job. So in most cases, I recommend a very boring entry to a cover letter, which is I'm applying for this position that was advertised X. This comes from chatting with lots of people from HR who say this is really helpful because they always like to know where their jobs are being found. But it also means that the person looking at it really knows what it is that you're applying to, because you don't know what the structure is within the recruiting team or the HR or the hiring team. People may have multiple jobs, they may be looking at different applications. Just be very clear about what you're doing so it's evident to the person reading it. Those middle paragraphs, that's where your emotion comes in, right? You're resonating with what you're seeing from the job description. And then usually, name dropping in that last paragraph is great. So, I met with a representative from your organization, so-and-so, at this career fair, and it was really enjoyable chatting with them. Or I've had several information interviews with alumni from Penn who work at your firm, and they've all said that they enjoy the innovative work, and that's exactly what I hope to bring to this role. So name dropping is good. You can sometimes name drop in that top paragraph as well, but only I would try to prioritize most of that in that last paragraph at the end of the once you've done your selling and marketing of your skills. So the question about how to start it off, right? The dear so-and-so question is sort of an interesting one. Generally speaking, you don't know who's got their hands on your cover letter as part of the process, right? So if there's a recruiting team or talent acquisition, they will read it and then they'll pass it on to the hiring manager. So there's 2 different people already there in that process. Sometimes you're only applying to one person who's both the supervisor and the hiring manager and does everything. It depends on the nature of the organization. I think in general terms, my recommendation is a non-gendered term like dear hiring manager, because that covers everyone who's potentially going to have their hands on it. And I don't think really people care. I mean, if it's a smaller organization where you should know because the person who posted the job had their name on the job and they said, if you have any questions about this job, reach out to me. Obviously, make sure you're including their name there, but taking an opportunity to guess at people and wondering if it's the right person, I think is oftentimes too stressful. HR people change positions all the time. They switch between firms, they make diagonal moves. And so the person that even posted the job may not be there anymore. So I don't think it matters if you get it wrong. I don't think it matters if the person reading it is like, oh, I'm not that person, but I work with them and they're doing a different job. I don't think that really matters. But I also think hiring manager is perfectly fine if you can't find that information. If you are networking with people and they are also applied for a position that you're applying to, then finding the name of the eventual hiring manager, the supervisor, I think is also a good strategy, right? So eventually the person who makes the decision can be the one that you're really addressing in the letter. And the HR people won't find that an affront either, even though they'll be the first person who's reading that. So this is a typical first paragraph that I see in sort of cover letter drafts that come my way. I'm writing to express my interest in applying for the consulting role at X. I'm a master's student at Penn in my last year of a bioengineering degree. I graduated from the University of Michigan. I believe that my combination of research and business skills will be a great fit for this role and will allow me to further develop my professional career. So here are the challenges with that. Well, first of all, it's very non-direct, right? So I'm writing to express my interest in possibly applying to this position. So I just be more direct. I am applying for the position of X, a organization that was here. The master's degree and the bachelor's degree, obviously those things are covered in the resume. So sometimes it's worth repeating, but you don't have to necessarily go through all of your background in this first paragraph where there may be other information that you want to get across. And I'll give you an example of how I might approach it differently. The I believe statement is the most challenging one, right? Because obviously the writer does believe this. I believe that I have a lot to bring. But if this is the first document that I'm reading, there's not much to go on as the hiring manager that makes me believe that too. So your belief statement is sort of not quite connecting or resonating with me because yes, you believe it, but I don't, because I don't know what your combination of research and business skills are at this point in time. So before a belief statement, I'd usually recommend making a statement of what it is that you are actually bringing. And then you can follow that with, based on this, I believe that I am a good fit. And then as I was talking about earlier, this position sort of says, this will allow me to further develop my skills. That puts the emphasis on what you get from the experience, as opposed to you saying, I'm excited to bring my skills to this role, which sort of demonstrates what you bring to the role itself, as opposed to what you gain from it. So this is long. This is not necessarily a perfect paragraph, but this is sort of how I might reorient the narrative here. I'm writing to apply for the consulting position at X that was advertised on Handshake. With 2 years of experience coordinating multidisciplinary research projects using innovative research skills and through establishing successful multi-lab collaboration, success in advocating for Penn Leadership for New Funds for an undergraduate mentoring program, and a strong quantitative background gained from my current master's degree, I'm excited to bring my passion for client-focused problem solving to this role. I already see now that I'm reading it out loud that it's too long and too complicated as a sentence. This is why I should always read out loud. But the emphasis here is, here are all the things that are relevant about my experience to the role itself, right? I have this, I've done this, I've advocated, I've got quantitative skills, I have this background, and I want to bring these skills to this role where I know that my client focus and problem solving skills are going to be important. So the emphasis is not on, well, I went to Penn, I went to the University of Michigan, it's on, here's what I gained from that. So these summary of skills are very similar to the summary of skills that you might see at the top of the resume. You're sort of connecting the same themes from what you're pulling from the resume into the cover letter. But a strong opening paragraph that's slightly better worded than this one is going to make sure that the reader wants to read more, because then they're like, oh, this sounds like exactly what we're looking for. I should carry on through that narrative. So making that first paragraph a nice summary of what the employer is most excited by before you make any sort of belief statements, I think is going to be an important approach. For the middle paragraphs, the way that I might approach it is to think about a theme for each paragraph. It doesn't have to be a singular skill, but a theme like communication or data analysis or problem solving, right? So things that are clusters of skills. Provide a general overview of what that is, and then find an example, a story to tell that connects those themes to the reality of what you've done. And what I mean by a hint of drama here is, a story that is, I worked on this project and it worked out well because we published a paper. It's an okay story, but it's not very engaging. But a story that is, one of the hardest parts about this project was that this thing didn't happen, or we couldn't have access to the data. And so what I had to do was this, this, and this, and that turned out well because now we've just published the paper. So the drama is the challenge that you've overcome with the cluster of skills that you're bringing to the new role, right? People love drama. Drama is the essence of all stories that we write, right? There's an element of tension there. And you're trying to capture a little bit of that in your cover letter too, because that's what makes it an engaging story. During my PhD in neurobiology at Penn, I've developed 2 research projects as part of protocols as part of 3 research projects I'm currently leading. I've taken every opportunity to keep the tools I'm developing to answer questions on memory formation at the very cutting edge of this field. One of my most challenging projects has been this. We didn't have these tools in our lab, so I had to develop a new relationship with faculty members and a postdoc to do this. And I was able to implement this successfully. And I really enjoyed learning these new skills and teaching them to other researchers in the lab and forming what's already been a wonderful, productive collaboration with our engineering partners. So, there are themes here: new, innovative, cutting edge, right? I'm trying to get across as I write this for this made up person that that's something that's important to me, to be doing new things. I had to develop new relationships. Relationship building is a really great transferable skill, but not only did I develop the relationship, I applied what I learned from that. And I enjoyed the process of learning. I enjoyed learning, I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed mentoring. And then, wonderfully productive is just sort of a flair of language just to make it feel more engaging, more energizing, right? I found this to be wonderfully productive, and choose your own language here to make it sound like you. But I think that adds a little element of emotional energy to that process. So how can you tell stories, good stories in your cover letter? Well, there are a few resources that I would point you to that I think would be helpful. One is actually our big interview platform, which is primarily for doing interview prep and mock interviews online in the comfort of your own home. But as part of the interview prep, they are all about helping you tell good stories, right? So behavioral-based questions, give me an example of a time when you did X. The answers to those questions are always based on stories that you're telling. And so the information that they have here about stories is really good, because you're basically taking that information and condensing it down into 2 or 3 lines in a cover letter, and that can be really impactful. So use the story builder, use the written modules on writing, on telling stories from Big Interview, and you'll find that that's actually really helpful. Now, they actually do have cover letter information on Big Interview as well, and I'll show you a screenshot of that later on. But this is the story builder, right? So if you're prepping for interviews, you can actually go through, and they prompt you to write down the different parts of the STAR story, right? So STAR is situation, task, action, result. Helps you break down a story into component parts so that you stay structured. You can do something similar as you're writing about your stories in your cover letters too. Now, I wrote a piece, again, I'll put the links in the chat in just a second, but I wrote a piece about the STAR method in this blog here. And what I try to do in this particular one is to take the STAR method slightly beyond the situation, task, action, result, and include things that were also emotionally resonant. So as part of this story, as part of this article, I talked about 2 additional components of the STAR story. One was emotional resonance at the end, and one was relevance to the employer, right? So having told a STAR story, if you then do take a step back and say, I really enjoyed this, or I found this particularly satisfying because, that's that sort of emotional resonance aspect where you're really giving insight into the inner workings of your brain. And then the R, the ER that I'm adding to the end of the STAR method, the R is the relevance to the employer, where you might say, and I'm particularly excited that this role, prioritizes this type of work, right? So you can even connect that within those middle paragraphs to demonstrate how the stories that you're telling and the skills that you're illustrating in those stories are really resonating with the job responsibilities that you'd be doing in that role. And then the last paragraph, as I said, my recommendation is the why this job, why this organization. And so this is where you do get to demonstrate that you've been proactive, right? So if you have a subset of employees that you're really excited about, you should be prioritizing networking with people in those organizations, Penn alumni, people from your networks, representatives who come for info sessions at Penn or come to career fairs, you can have conversations with them. Anytime that you can name drop in this last paragraph is great, right? So you might say, this role is particularly exciting because I know that your projects focusing on X, Y, and Z are important, and that I can add value to those. I really enjoyed chatting with this person who also said that the strong mentoring program that you have for new hires was really helpful to them. And I'm excited by that because I've always valued strong mentoring, right? So you can be your authentic self and talk about what's really driving some of your interest in that role. Again, be authentic. Don't just say, I'm applying for this job because you are the best company in the world, right? They may know that already, or they may not necessarily care that you think that, because that's not, they don't represent the entire company. They represent a specific role in that organization that they're most interested in hearing, hearing you resonate with. So projects and people are some of the things that I think you can touch on in this last paragraph. This is feedback that we've received directly from employers, which is interesting because this is also feedback that we've received directly from employers. And so what this basically means is that you don't know for sure who's going to value your cover letter and who's not, right? And so that might make you feel less excited about writing them because someone is not going to read it and someone is. But to a certain extent, you have to assume that everyone is going to read it. And if they do read it, which you want them to do because it's going to be fantastic, then you're going to give them more information and a better understanding of who you are and what you can add value to. So even though some people don't prioritize it, and I wish they would just not ask for it at that point in time, but even though some people aren't going to sort of resonate with it entirely as a genre of writing, do write it as if everyone is going to find value there. Because as soon as they read it, it should, as I said, add value to the other materials that you're getting across. Okay, let's cover a few resources, just make sure that you have access to those. And then if you do have any questions on the stuff that I've touched on now's a good time to throw those in the chat. And once I've gone through the resources, I'm happy to answer those questions that pop up for you. On the Career Services website, we have learn how to prepare application materials. We have information, general information on cover letters, and a few samples here and there. It's really hard to do samples with cover letters though, so we don't really prioritize that because they are very unique documents to the stories that people tell and the roles that they're applying to. And the structure doesn't have to be the way that I've identified, although I think that's an effective way of getting across your information. We have the Vault resume guides too. So each of these will have a little bit of cover letters that it's worth reading about. Gaining lots of perspectives on these materials can sometimes be difficult because people will say different things, but your job is to sort of pick out of all of these materials the things that seem most meaningful to you in the way that you want to present yourself, right? Your materials are two-dimensional versions of yourself, so they should represent what you want to get across as part of your professional brand. So it's okay for you to pick and choose different advice from different sources as you're going through that. I talked about Big Interview. They do have a video curriculum and a written curriculum on resumes and cover letters, so you can watch these videos on putting together effective resumes. And then they have a 10-minute section here on writing persuasive cover letters. That's going to be a great resource for you to use as well. So do take advantage of that. If you're a PhD, you can go onto the Versatile PhD website, something that we subscribe to so that you have access to it. And you can find the link to that in the links that I put into the chat. And there are real life resumes and cover letters and job descriptions that PhDs have shared about their experience. So you can see the job description and then you can see what they wrote to get the job. And that doesn't mean that that was a perfect set of application materials because I've looked through them and I have feedback on all the materials that are there because that's part of the job that I have. But they demonstrate how people have taken their approach and their experiences and made it come to life in different ways. So you may find some good examples there. In Imagine PhD, another PhD tool, this time for the humanities and social sciences, we do have for the job families that they list in this tool, sample cover letters, sample resumes, and sample job descriptions, where they sort of show how all these things fit together, right? So some of these are annotated so you can see what the important things are, and then they demonstrate how these packets connect to the job description that are out there. So again, another great tool to use to get some examples of cover letters for. And they have about 15, I can't remember how many job families. So they have different versions of these cover letters for the different job families to illustrate the different narratives that you're going to be creating as part of that. Aurora, another platform for PhDs, has a resource on how to write cover letters for professional careers. They also have materials for the academic job search where you can talk about, where they talk about writing cover letters for applying for faculty positions. So no matter which path you're interested in, you may be interested in both, you can find some great resources there on putting together effective cover letters. Aurora is great because it also has these workbooks that walk you through the process of getting the materials up to speed and allow you to reflect on the steps that you're taking. So the workbooks on Aurora are one of the main selling points, I think, because they really provide structure. So I sort of recommend taking a look at those as well. If you are a design student from the Weissman School of Design, we have a cover letter guide for design students. Knowing that sometimes, especially in the field of architecture, employers don't like necessarily to read a lot. They like to look at and engage in the designs themselves. Cover letters still have an important role to play. So there's a guide here from our experience of working with this population that you can download and take a look at. And then don't overlook LinkedIn Learning. Every Penn student should have access to LinkedIn Learning, which is something that you normally only get if you have a premium account. And you can go onto LinkedIn Learning, just look on your LinkedIn profile, up in the top right-hand corner, you'll see the icon. And there's 157 sort of resources here, mini clips, courses related to cover letters that you can take a look at. Some of these are short, some of these are longer, but so much there that you can sort of resonate with and get examples for and advice on in terms of putting your cover letter together.